All right, so this is Abdullah Najjar, and welcome everybody to another episode of In the East Wing. Um, Today I'm talking to Harrison Mann, who recently resigned from the Defense Intelligence Agency, and I'm interested in exploring a variety of subjects with him, and so I'm very happy to have him on the show with me today. Harrison, or I should probably say Major Harrison Mann, welcome.
Uh, Happy to be here, and Harrison is fine.
Absolutely. So Harrison, I think one of the things that I guess some of my viewers or people who have been keeping up with what's been happening with Israel and Gaza, one of the things that they might be familiar with is that you recently decided to sort of pull the plug and issue your resignation from the Defense Intelligence Agency. And I think that's one thing I'd love to explore today with you. But at the same time, I'm also interested in learning more about your the early days. You know, looking back to when you first joined the army. Um, can you maybe tell us a little bit more about the sort of motivation that drove you to pursue this sort of path in life, and what were some of the variables that helped you make that decision to join U.S. Army?
Sure. So it's a decision I made largely when I was in high school and undergrad in college. So this was 2007, 2008, 2009, and that was a time in the United States where we were still in the thick, I'd say, of the global war on terror, and it was near the end of the surge in Iraq, and it was a little bit before we started intensifying our efforts in Afghanistan, and it was a time before the narrative around those wars changed. Now, even within the military or the government, we look at them quite critically, and it's understood that those were failed projects that should not be repeated. But back then, that was uncritically, agreed that that was kind of the big quest and struggle of our age was those wars. And so I
Mm.
grew up around that, understanding that that was the big venture that America was engaged in, and that it was important. And I felt like I should do my duty to be part of that without really thinking much harder about what that would actually mean, or what the strategic thinking or lack of thinking was behind those wars. And I also came from a pretty liberal upper middle class community in Atlanta where joining the military was unheard of. So it was also a little bit of a rebellious or contrarian act for me back then. And so I went to West Point for a couple months and really did not like it. So I always give big kudos to my friends who stayed
Oh
and
boy,
graduated.
yeah.
But we ended up reuniting later because I went to the College of William and Mary in Virginia
Hmm.
and decided to do ROTC there for the same reasons, and stuck with it and really enjoyed the experience and the training, and thought that that was a worthwhile thing to do again without really delving much deeper into the purpose or the validity of the war, which was at that point Afghanistan, that we were all very excited to participate in.
Yeah. And do you recall maybe the time or first year, or maybe first couple of years after you graduated? I mean, what was your level of patriotism? What was the level of excitement at the time? What was going on in your head during that time?
I was actually very frustrated because at the time, like I said, I volunteered to be an infantry officer, which is meant to be the toughest, most dangerous job. And me and all the other guys, and back then it was only men. They finally opened it to women. Me and all the other guys were all very excited. We all thought we were going to go to Afghanistan and have this big, dramatic experience. And about half of us did, and the other half did not. So I was very frustrated that I did not end up in Afghanistan, and did not have what was supposed to be this both formative and validating and quintessential experience that we'd all signed up for. And of course, Now in the army, it's quite normal that people would not have combat deployments, but back then, after a decade of Iraq and Afghanistan, it was really unusual not to.
Mm.
And all of us had joined with the expectation we had that experience. And so when you didn't, even though now I'm quite fortunate that nothing bad happened to me, but at the time, that I ended up in Korea and then Kuwait
Ooh.
instead of Afghanistan was felt a little frustrating and embarrassing.
Oh gosh.
And otherwise, I think I had the same experience that everybody has in the army, which is you do a few cool things and a lot of silly things. And there were a number of times where I thought, okay, let me just finish my initial contract, but then more interesting and what I thought more impactful opportunities got presented to me, and that got me to stay in, uh, got me to re-up multiple times.
Mhm. You mentioned 2000, was it what, 2009 and 2010? I mean, wasn't that during the I mean, in Afghanistan in particular, I think that was during I think the Battle of the Korangal, right? There was like a big, one of the biggest operations, in the
Yeah.
Korangal Valley, or otherwise known as Death Valley. I mean, that. I mean, I don't know if you were aspiring to go there during that time. That would have been a very serious situation to put yourself into.
Yeah, and we all were looking forward to that, to be honest.
Mm.
And that being said, I don't think any of us signed up expecting to die. And especially Afghanistan, there are unfortunately, too many people who were wounded or killed, but the odds were still pretty good. And that if you went in with a platoon of people, you would all come back just in terms of the experience that most people ended up having. And our expectation of it was not that we didn't feel like the guys fighting in Ukraine or something, or in American wars, in previous American wars, where we thought we might all died. It was kind of you would go, uh, and this is not everyone's experience, but it was a lot of my friends' experience. You go, you get shot at a few times, everybody comes home, you get a new badge, and I think that is what a lot of us expected. And some people had a better time of it then, and some people certainly had a worse time of it. But that was what we thought was ahead.
Yeah. You mentioned Kuwait, and that kind of got me thinking. And I mean, Kuwait, was that your first experience in the Middle East, or did you have a prior experience?
Yeah.
Uh,
So to my earlier point about global war on terror being the feeling like the important adventure of our generation, that drove me and many other people to start taking Arabic, and that was the hot
oh yeah.
language back then.
Huh.
Used to be Russia, now it's Chinese, but in the aughts it was Arabic. So I took Arabic for that purpose, but I ended up really enjoying it, and that took me around the region, even while I was still in college, to a few places, namely Beirut and then the West Bank,
Right.
which I had chosen both purely to study Arabic, and my decision to go to Bethlehem and stay with the family there was really done with no ideology and a large degree of ignorance about what was about the intricacies of Israeli and Palestinian history. But I did get a good taste of the region, and against my will ended up learning quite a lot about that conflict as well from that experience.
Mm. Did you feel like, man, I want to go back? Did that sensation start kicking in after you finished that trip, or you were like, maybe I'll try something different? A different region, perhaps.
I think no, I mean I liked it. I really uh liked studying Arabic. I liked the region. I always had a really positive experience, and
Mm.
everyone who I met was wonderful and treated me wonderfully, and I had in my head that this would be my specialty and that I would specialize in the region, which is what ended up happening.
Yeah, yeah. So then, so when would you say that trip occurred around what year to Kuwait and to the region
Kuwait
broadly speaking?
was Kuwait was 2014 or 2015. I recall it was because we were there right when ISIS started taking over all of Iraq, and that was
Oh,
also quite frustrating. And I was sitting there, and I was with a uh, in a combined arms battalion, which meant Bradleys and tanks. My company was on
mm.
Bradley fighting vehicles, and
And by the way,
yes, I
those are
remember seeing.
cumbersome experiences, right? The Bradley, I think, is very hard
Yes,
to.
they were. Well, I honestly, I hated being on them. I was in two different units where we had them, and I thought they were the most annoying and worthless devices in the world. But I had been proven wrong because we gave them to the Ukrainians, and the
Oh,
Ukrainians have been using them to great effect to kill Russian tanks, which I think is the first time that has ever actually happened
wow.
in history. But yes, they are cumbersome indeed. And I remember I was consistently annoyed that a Bradley platoon does not have enough Bradleys to actually fit all of the soldiers in the back.
Oh.
And I could never get over that. That you get four Bradleys, which can fit six guys in the back each, but you have more than 24 infantrymen who you need to drive around. And I won't go off on that rant now. But yeah, we had Bradleys in tanks in Kuwait, and I recall we were all sitting there, and I was like, "What are we doing in Kuwait? It's ISIS storming through half of Iraq." So yeah, that's what I was in Kuwait.
Yeah.
Was it the launch of ISIS?
Gosh, what an interesting time to be in the region. I mean, that was. I remember, gosh, during that time I think I was in middle school, and there was this one guy who was with me in different classes, and his mom actually taught us mathematics as like a middle school teacher. And then there was this time, I think it was in January of 2014 or January of 2015. I don't recall exactly the month or the year, but he just disappeared, and no one heard about his where he went. I mean, no one knew about his whereabouts. And then a few days afterward, uh, we get this piece of news that he actually joined an ISIS cell and decided to bomb himself. So that was
What?
yeah, no, seriously, that was a major
So were you
event.
were you in were you living in Libya at this point, or was this in the States?
Oh, I was in Libya. I was in middle school.
Oh,
The guy was literally a
oh wow.
classmate. Yeah, no, it was a very interesting time to be alive during those that period. Um, yeah. So gosh. So after your journey to the Middle East, you went back to the U.S. You joined the Defense Intelligence Agency, or how did that come
Yeah, so
about?
I stayed in the army until this summer, and so my final assignment at DIA was still as an army officer. So I was there in uniform, and there's a number of military personnel who are posted there while they're still in the military.
Oh gosh. So I think it would be interesting to move into the um, the decision that you ultimately made to end a 13-year long career in
Yes,
the army. Is that what it is? Yeah.
yes,
So that would have been you submitted your letter. I think after October 7th, but I think that was in November, right? That's when you submitted your letter.
yeah. So I began my resignation, which is a drawn out administrative process. If you're in the military, I
Yeah.
started that in November. I didn't actually share the reasons for it,
Mm.
even with my office internally until April, and then in May I decided to publicly share it.
Mm. And do you recall what it is that you perhaps had seen, but also heard of that made you realize that this is the right decision to make to leave? What can you take us back to that period?
Yeah, I think ultimately it was a mounting feeling of hopelessness, and once I became entirely hopeless, which is to say hopeless that both U.S. policy was going to change, or that
Mm.
our own role, like my office's own role and my own role in it, was going to change. I felt like I didn't really have any other options because we saw from October 8th on the scale and the brutality really of the even before the ground operation, the Israeli bombing campaign in response to the October 7th attacks.
Mm.
And even while it was just, I don't want to say just bombing, but I said just bombing, and since that was the very earliest phase of the war before they'd even entered Gaza on foot, it was really clear, both on the inside and on the outside, I think it was clear to the entire world that it was going to be a very indiscriminate campaign of mass punishment.
Mm.
And it was not letting up. And that's, I think, what everybody expected the Israelis were going to do and how we expected them to respond. And what I did not expect, and what I think a lot of other people didn't expect, was that the US response would be so accommodating for so long. Like I said, we knew the Israelis were going to do some kind of awful vengeance, bloodletting, because they were very angry.
Yeah.
But in that first month after October 7th, I was able to see that the both publicly, the Biden administration was not going to put its foot down and not going to try to moderate their behavior. And then you could see that policy filter down the chain of command from the president to the NSC, down to the intel community, down to my agency. That nowhere, uh, at no echelon, was anybody really willing to inquire
Mm.
if we should moderate our support or to suggest putting their foot down. And at no echelon was was anybody really even acknowledging the fact that the support that we were providing was contributing to the killing and destruction in Gaza. Much, we were not we were not even connecting those very obvious dots to not which is not even demanding that we stop our support. We were not even really saying, "Hey, we're kind of contributing to this."
Yeah.
And I was able to understand that those questions were not really going to be asked or brought up. And the people who did bring up some general concerns about making sure that our support would not cause legal problems in the future, because we might be, you know, people concerned that given that the Israelis were killing lots of innocent people indiscriminately, they wanted to. They were worried. Okay, are we going to be implicated in this in a legal sense in the future?
Right.
But those discussions did not really go beyond posing the question, and I was able to see those discussions concluded without the decision that okay, we need to moderate our support because we're worried about this legal implications. And that was one of many signals or indications I saw that our support was not gonna let up in any way. And
Mm.
so once I understood that, I knew that every day that I kept going to the office, I'd be contributing to it, because there was not going to be a moment where somebody was like, "Hey, okay, everybody, we talked it over. We're going to stop helping the Israelis so much because of what they're doing." And that's the moment that I was really hoping for. But
Yeah.
I I had enough signals and indications to understand that that was never going to come.
Mm. When you were able to reach these conclusions, or actually before you were able to reach these conclusions, was there a way for you to maybe did you have conversations about this outside of the professional life? I mean, conversations with friends or family or people that you knew, or was that something that you never voiced to anyone until you actually realized that you're no longer going to be part of that?
I I did not voice it in detail for a long time.
Mm.
I spoke, I think, in broad terms to some friends who work in related fields, not in my agency, but who are in the larger business, especially in the first month when I was so frustrated and I was just trying to see because I nobody at work was talking about it. And so
Yeah.
there's a while where going into the office, I felt crazy. I was like, am I the only one who is upset that we are supporting the Israelis while they are uh, bombing every hospital in Gaza? But so talking to some of my friends outside of the office who work in the NatSec foreign policy government space and doing a temperature check with them to see how they felt. But I did not, I didn't talk about it in depth with a lot of people, in part and because there's classification concerns are one
Mm.
thing. And if you ever watch any of my interviews, especially my earlier ones where I'm speaking extremely slowly and carefully, it's mainly because I'm afraid I'm going to say something I'm not supposed to, which was always one of my big concerns in publicizing my resignation.
Yeah.
Uh, this is a everything in the intel world is classified, or a lot of it is,
Mm.
and everything specifically about this specific bilateral relationship is not made public.
Right.
And but I also, it was also difficult to even vocalize the reasons that I felt guilty because that was a very hard thing to say out loud and to admit to myself. It's another reason that I did not talk with the people about it for a while.
Mm. And also because maybe because of your background as a Jewish individual, maybe that played a role, right, in terms of how you even voice it or how you even talk about it to family members or even those that you visited in the West Bank or Bethlehem. I think.
Yeah, I was fortunate that my I was never worried about how my family was going to react to this,
Mm.
and that they are. I'm fortunate that they are very well informed people for the most part who did not. I wouldn't say there before all this. There was we were I was totally eye to eye with everybody about Israel, but I also was never concerned that I was going to get like disowned or there'd be a really violent reaction, which is it's not the case for other people in my life. And I have other Jewish friends who this has become a massive wedge between them and their family. But I was very fortunate that I didn't have to worry about that.
Mm. You mentioned earlier that oftentimes you're gonna have to speak a little bit slowly. I think there are times when you have to speak too fast because the segment's gonna end. We gotta wrap things up, you know. Um, but no, I totally understand how oftentimes one has to be really careful, not to say things that might jeopardize, I guess, national security or other individuals that are primarily in that world. And some stuff are sensitive, so we'll definitely try not to. Maybe we'll try to make sure that you're careful here. Um,
That's
one
fine. I'm not going to say I would never say anything or come close to saying anything that actually jeopardizes national security. I would only possibly say something that could very slightly incriminate myself, but I would never be anything shocking that would give anybody an advantage.
Okay. Well, we'll be careful not to,
Please
you know.
we're worrying about me. We're not. I'm not going to accidentally say the nuclear codes on your show.
Good. No, I really, I'm glad to hear that. So, Harrison, I mean, now you've been quite, you've been public about this for 2 months now, I think, right? I mean, since June, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. Yeah. What are some of the maybe key concerns you've heard from people who are still in the inside that you might have communication with? And we'll obviously, I'm sure you're going to try to avoid any names or anything too specific, but maybe something that stands out and you think is worth maybe highlighting here.
Well, I'll just say my none of my concerns are unique or the result of my own analytic genius, and
Mm.
they're pretty generic and widely held, and were identified a long time ago by by everybody who follows this issue. So I'm not texting my friends at the agency back and forth for updates. I would never do that. I update them about me sometimes, but I think my own concerns that I've been vocalizing since I got out are the concerns that everybody has in the government who follows this issue. And there is the humanitarian concern, which is the reason that I quit,
Mm.
which is what really depressed and angered me to the extent that I was willing to take some what I at the time what I felt were significant risks and life changes to speak out about. And then there are the strategic concerns, which I used to work with the people who were paid to identify and assess these.
Yeah.
And I've been especially vocal about those recently, and that's namely the enduring risk that the what started as the Gaza war is now going to turn into a giant war between Israel and Hezbollah that Netanyahu launches with an invasion into Lebanon.
Mm.
And we saw just this weekend the latest bout of fortunately contained back and forth reprisals with Hezbollah responding for the targeted killing that Israel carried out in Beirut a couple weeks ago. And that concern in some form or another has been there for months and months and months, since long before I quit. And I the Biden administration has clearly never been taking ending the war in Gaza seriously, which is to say, using pressure to force Israel to force Netanyahu to actually entertain a ceasefire. And that's kind of been a given for a while. And I'm even more surprised that they don't seem to be taking seriously the threat of this war kicking off. And I have criticized others for describing it in passive terms, and I need to not do it myself, because it's not like escalation happens or the war will start. It's
Mm-hmm.
the only way this war can start is by Israel starting it, by either launching a ground operation into Lebanon and or doing mass bombing of Beirut in an attempt to punish Hezbollah. And that risk is still there. Our government continues to increase that risk by basically rewarding Israel every time they escalate. And we again just saw that over the past months, which is right after he visits Congress, Netanyahu green lights these assassinations in Tehran and Beirut,
Mm.
and our first reaction is to send an unprecedented number of aircraft carriers. I think
Yeah.
into I don't know if they're in the Med or the Red Sea to protect him from the consequences of his actions.
Mm.
And the result of that is that it validates his behavior, and it means he knows he can do even more provocative assassinations or strikes in the future, because he has proof of concept that he will get instant personal security detail from the U.S. Navy if he does that. And so he will do something again. And Hezbollah and Iran have been clear in every way possible, including in their responses or lack of responses to the killings I'm talking about, that they don't want more war. And I don't think that's going to change. But each time they do a little reprisal to save face, even if it's just like a couple hundred rockets with advance notice, which is basically what Hezbollah did this weekend, that's not a risk-free proposition. And each time that happens, there's no way to guarantee that they won't get a lucky hit, or some Israeli air defense system won't fail, or the rocket's going to fall short and hit a civilian target, or land on a daycare or something.
Right.
And that risk is just going to exist as long as the back and forth kind of normal attacks and the reprisals for the high profile attacks, as long as that continues. And there's no way to control that other than getting both sides to actually cease fire. And the fact that we keep rolling the dice with this risk is really frightening and disappointing to me. And of course, on top of that, right, in terms of all the actions that could happen that could make Netanyahu feel like he has no choice but to start this war. We also know he does have all sorts of perverse incentives, as do some of his political allies, to actually start this war. And I don't know if he's just waiting for the right pretense or if he genuinely does not want the war, but he could feel like his hand's forced if Hezbollah hits the right thing. But either way, the risk is there. and it grows as long as we let this go on.
Yeah.
And that has been a concern by everybody. It's a concern that the Biden administration recognizes, and everyone's recognized for 10 months, or especially I think since the new year, and we are not taking it seriously.
Mm. Did you expect this sort of back and forth where you have this deal on the table, and then you expect and then you hear, I think, wasn't it, I guess, Secretary Blinken saying that, oh, the
Yes.
ball is in Hamas's corner, and then the deal is, you get these mixed messages that I remember attending these press conferences, and every time they say, oh, there are things that can be changed or worked around, but we can't guarantee that they will be. And then every single time it's just this, it's like it's a process that just doesn't seem to have, doesn't reach eventually a goal, right? And then you hear this piece of news coming out that, oh, Netanyahu's stalling. It's just like, I mean, I'd be interested to get your perspective on this. I mean, did you expect it to take this long to reach a deal, or you don't think the deal will be reached? I mean, what's the where do you
Yeah,
stand on this?
you've maybe heard the expression, the purpose of a system is what it does. I don't think we can realistically call this ceasefire process a process that's actually intended to end the war, at
Mm,
least from the perspective of both the Biden administration and certainly from the Netanyahu government. Uh, it has only served to buy time for the Israelis, for
mm,
them to, and whether it's buying time for them to fully cleanse Gaza, or do whatever Netanyahu thinks he needs to do to declare victory there, or it's buying time for him to wait for Trump to get elected if that happens, or it's buying time for him to start his next war. It's all it has served to do is buy time, and I do not accept the idea that Antony Blinken is so clueless that he has been continually shocked for months on end and repeated cycles of so-called ceasefire negotiations, that it's a surprise to him that the effect of all of these rounds of negotiations has just been buying time, and has not been a good faith effort by Netanyahu to actually reach a ceasefire.
mm,
And I think you could play that game the first time the talks broke down, but you can't feign ignorance when everybody, Israeli press every day is saying Netanyahu does not want a deal. People from his government are saying he's sabotaging the deal. The hostages' family are saying he's sabotaging the deal, and
yeah.
and the president himself occasionally has indicated that he acknowledges that as well. And the idea that there will be and Netanyahu, every time after the Secretary of State announces that Netanyahu's agreed to a deal, Netanyahu goes on Israeli TV the next day and announces we're going to fight Hamas to the last man, and there's never any indication that he has actually agreed to a deal. And so, again, this we can only see this process for what the expected outcome that it continues to produce, which is buying time for the Israelis. And what was true 6 months ago is true now, which is that there will not be a ceasefire deal without actual U.S. pressure, both to force Netanyahu to agree to the deal, and as a guarantor of the deal for Hamas, because Israel has no credibility. That's part of the issue, right? Is that
Mm,
they keep saying, okay, we might do a ceasefire deal, but we reserve the right to attack Hamas whenever we want, which is not really a ceasefire. So
yeah, it's crazy.
I think it's tough to expect Hamas to accept a ceasefire deal that involves them giving up their most important leverage, which is their Israeli hostages they have, without them thinking that there's some kind of enforcement mechanism in place. That they know that they need to know that Israel will be punished in some way if Israel breaks its terms of the deal, and that can't happen until the United States demonstrates that we're willing to leverage military support to enforce the deal.
Mm. One of the things I notice about your letter is that, or maybe it's not in the letter. I think it was in one of your interviews. Yeah, I'm mixing things up here. You mentioned that some I think members of the Defense Intelligence Agency uh, indicated that we can still do the same work that we're doing, but maybe switch me to a different portfolio and have someone else do this type of work or something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, people in the government have done that.
Yeah, yeah. So if someone were to, someone who's very, maybe I should probably say, for lack of a better word, very patriotic, wants to serve, wants to uh, do some sort of public service, and maybe join the Defense Intelligence Agency or another government organization, and they're maybe grappling with this idea, right? Maybe I would be assigned to do something that I maybe disagree with, or a policy advance something that I disagree with. And that's something is mentioned in your letter, right? The idea that you might have to do something you do not necessarily agree with, but broadly speaking, you are trying to maybe make a difference. Maybe not with every policy you'd agree with, but you're trying to make a difference. But say someone joins and they're assigned to do something that is similar to, maybe they would occupy the shoes that you had on before you decided to
Mhm.
resign. What would you say to that person? How would you advise them, or what? If assuming they have concerns as well prior to joining.
I think, when you're in that role, you don't have to do exactly what I did, but you do have an obligation. And if you feel bad about the work that you're doing, there's a reason for that. And I, it's important for people to know that there's a spectrum of action you can take between being quiet and doing nothing and publicly quitting, like I did. And because I think sometimes that is the right solution for some people, but it's not an option available to everybody, uh, especially for material reasons, which is unfortunately one of the reasons that we have a lot of people who know what they're doing is wrong and are continuing to support, uh, our policy in this conflict. But like you mentioned, short, I think you can ask to transfer, which people have done elsewhere, or otherwise ask to stop working on this project. And I know elsewhere there's also people who didn't transfer but just told their boss, "Hey, I'm going to keep doing the 80% of my job that I've been doing. I'm not doing the 20% that's Israel support."
Oh wow.
That's not available to everybody, but people have done that.
Huh.
People have transferred. I Something that I have also encouraged people to do is get it in writing from your supervisor or from their supervisor that they are asserting or they're affirming that what you're being asked to do is within the legal and ethical standards of your organization. Because a lot of what happened and what I witnessed and what I was a part of myself, I was both receiving and giving orders or tasks. We were doing all this and nobody was saying out loud. We were doing all this. We were all feeling a little uneasy about it. Nobody said out loud, "Hey, I think for sure what we're doing is legal and ethical and it's the right thing." When we were asking people to continue their support in one way or another. And if I'd done this again, I would have wanted to create a forcing function that my superiors and their superiors had to take responsibility and some level of accountability for what they were asking people to do. And instead of just treating it like business as usual, I wish I would have challenged them,
Mhm.
and they in turn have challenged their superiors, saying, here's the concerns that we have. You are asking me to do this support or do this project every day. Can you please confirm that you think the thing that you're asking me to do is not just consistent with US law and international law, but also the ethical standards of our organization? And making somebody put their name on that statement or on that affirmation. And I don't know if that really would have changed policy, but I think it would have given some people pause and forced them to acknowledge what we were actually doing. And because we didn't really have to. We treated the whole thing like the way we treated the Ukraine response, like the way we treated, our response to the outbreak of the Sudanese civil war. Business as usual in in the agency.
Mm.
So those are all options that people have. And also if you feel like you can't do any of that, I think everybody has the ability to at least talk, even if it's just to their person in the cubicle next to them, because one of the things that I experienced was nobody, even in an informal way, was acknowledging the reality of the work that we were doing and its connection to what was happening in Gaza. And that was one of the reasons that I felt really hopeless and I felt like nothing was going to change. Was that nobody was even saying out loud the very obvious things that I was thinking.
Mm.
And so there are a lot of institutions like the one where I came from where people are not even at that level yet. So I think those are all options for people who understand that they're supporting an immoral policy.
And Harrison, now that you're on the outside, I mean, what's life has what's life been like after resignation, and what sort of maybe clarity that you've had in recent months, if any? Oh, I think you're muted, Harrison.
It's been busier than I thought. I
Oh,
the long vacation that I was looking forward to has still not materialized, but for a good reason. I did not understand how much opportunity there would be for me to speak or for people to maintain interest in hearing from me. And I have tried to take every opportunity that I thought was worthwhile and available to not just explain my decision, but to try and inform people and be one of the many voices and growing chorus of voices that's both calling, not just calling for a ceasefire, but explaining why our policy is dangerous and wrong, and helping people understand that and don't need pressure. And with that, also continuing to raise the alarm bells about the outside of Gaza escalation that we continue to see, and that even at its, I think, current quote unquote contained phase, we still should be worried about, not find acceptable. So that has been a lot of talking to the press, talking to enterprising podcasters, writing op-eds, and doing intermittent engagement on the Hill with members of Congress and their staffs.
hmm. Well, Harrison, I want to thank you for your time in this conversation we've had. It was a pleasure having you here and hearing more about your story and your background. It was really insightful. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's great to meet you. Great to talk, Abdullah.
Absolutely.